One carved a pentagram into her classmate's chest. Another lured her cheating partner into the night with a loaded gun in her handbag. Each of them committed acts so brutal that even the detectives were left shaken. But these weren't just crimes of passion or madness. These were executions for which the state had only one answer: death. This is the story of women who were sentenced to die for the lives they stole. What pushed them past the point of no return? Let's start at the beginning, but be warned. By the end, you may not know whether to fear them or feel sorry for them. Mimi Wong. There are women whose names are whispered with a shudder, whose crimes are so ferocious they echo long after their execution. Mimi Wong is one of them. In the neon haze of 1970s, Singapore, beneath the glitz of cocktail lounges and the low murmur of scandal, Mimi wasn't just a bar hostess. She was a storm waiting to erupt. With beauty that turned heads and a temper that silenced rooms, she was the kind of woman who didn't just fall in love, she consumed it. And when she lost control of that love, she killed for it. Mimi's obsession was Hiroshi Watanabe, a married Japanese man. She was his mistress, once adored, later discarded. And when he walked away from her, back into the arms of his wife, Ayako, Mimi didn't just feel rejected, she felt erased. But Mimi wasn't the kind of woman you erased. On the night of January 6, 1970, she made sure no one would forget her name. Alongside her former husband, Sim Wo-kum, she forced her way into Ayako's flat. What followed was pure savagery. As Ayako begged for her life, Sim held her down and Mimi stabbed her, again and again and again. Blood soaked the floor. It wasn't just murder. It was vengeance in its rawest, ugliest form. And the most haunting part? Ayako's 9-year-old daughter, Chieko, watched it all unfold. That little girl would later sit in a courtroom, trembling, as she testified against the woman who had destroyed her family. Mimi tried to plead insanity. She claimed she wasn't in her right mind, but the court wasn't buying it. Her rage wasn't madness. It was calculated, deliberate, and deeply personal. She and Sim became the first couple to be sentenced to death in Singapore since its independence. On July 27, 1973, they were both hanged. But the story didn't end at the gallows. Mimi Wong became a legend of fear, the first woman executed in modern Singapore, a name that would forever be linked with betrayal, obsession, and unrelenting violence. Because Mimi didn't just kill. She made a statement. If she couldn't have the life she wanted, she would destroy the one who took it from her. Kanae Kijima. She wasn't a knife-wielding maniac or a shadowy figure lurking in the dark. Kanae Kijima was far more dangerous because she didn't have to chase her victims. They came to her, willingly, desperately. Through the glowing screens of konkatsu sites, where men in Japan go looking for wives, Kanae presented herself as the perfect partner, gentle, charming, ready to settle down. But behind that warm smile was a predator who didn't want a husband. She wanted a payout. And if that meant her suitors had to die, so be it. From 2007 to 2009, Kijima, aka the Konkatsu Killer, lured in a series of older, often lonely men, promising marriage and affection. She wasn't interested in love, only their bank accounts. Once they trusted her with their money, their lives conveniently ended in what looked like accidents or suicides. Carbon monoxide poisoning, mysterious house fires, drownings. One man was found naked in his bathtub. Another died in a blaze, surrounded by charcoal. One victim transferred 17 million yen to her just days before his death. And she wasn't working one victim at a time. Kijima juggled multiple targets simultaneously, like a con artist running a deadly lottery. Police were slow to catch on because she didn't fit the profile. She didn't marry these men. She didn't even live with them long term. She floated just close enough to take what she wanted, then vanished before suspicion could stick. But Kanae got greedy. By 2009, too many bodies were piling up. When one of her victims, 41-year-old Yoshiyuki Oide, was found dead in his car, the pieces finally began to fall into place. A deeper investigation exposed a trail of lies, fraud, and death. Kijima wasn't just a con woman. She was a methodical killer who weaponized trust and used the promise of love as her deadliest tool. When her case went to trial, she showed no remorse, no grief, no explanation beyond cold, rehearsed denials. The judge called her crimes intentional and extremely malicious. And on April 14, 2017, Kanae Kijima was sentenced to death. Poon Yuen Chung. At just 22 years old, Poon Yuen Chung stepped off a flight at Singapore's Changi Airport, dragging behind her 2 pristine Louis Vuitton bags and a death sentence she didn't know was already sealed. The young woman from Hong Kong looked like any ordinary traveler, maybe even a little too polished. But beneath the luxury branding and calm demeanor, something was wrong. Customs officers spotted it immediately. There was something odd about those bags. And those false bottoms? They practically whispered secrets. When officers cracked them open, the truth spilled out. Over 4 kilograms of nearly pure heroin, neatly packed, perfectly hidden. And Poon wasn't alone. Her companion, Lam Hoi Ka, was caught with an additional 5 kilograms in her luggage. Together, these young women were now at the center of a multi-million-dollar drug trafficking operation. Poon claimed she was duped, that she had no idea what she was carrying, that someone else had packed her bags. But Singapore doesn't gamble when it comes to drugs. In a country known for its zero-tolerance policy, ignorance isn't a defense, especially when the haul is worth nearly $9 million. As the trial unfolded, Poon remained largely silent, save for her repeated cries of innocence. But silence couldn't save her. Not when the heroin was literally sewn into her suitcase. Not when the evidence weighed more than 4 kilograms. The court found her guilty of drug importation, one of the most serious capital offenses in Singaporean law, and sentenced her to death. Even as high-profile figures like the governor of Hong Kong pleaded for clemency, Singapore's stance did not waver. No exceptions, no second chances. On April 21, 1995, Poon Yuen Chung was executed by hanging. She became one of the few women in modern history to face the gallows in Singapore, and a stark reminder of the deadly cost of crossing borders with poison in your bag. Was she a naive pawn or a cold courier for a ruthless syndicate? It didn't matter in the end. In Singapore, heroin in your suitcase is as dangerous as a weapon in your hand. And for Poon Yuen Chung, those designer bags didn't carry clothes, they carried death. Aileen Wuornos. Highways are supposed to take you places. For 7 men in Florida, they were the last roads they'd ever travel. Between 1989 and 1990, a woman named Aileen Wuornos prowled the sun-baked roadsides of Florida, thumbing rides, flashing smiles, and selling sex. But beneath the rough-edged charm was a storm waiting to break. Wuornos wasn't just turning tricks, she was turning death into a routine. She shot 7 men one by one. She claimed they tried to essay her, that she killed in self-defense, that the world had used her one too many times, and she'd finally snapped. But the bodies piling up didn't care about her story. She took their lives and their wallets and vanished into the interstate haze. When she was caught, the headlines branded her the first female serial killer of modern America. The courts handed her 6 death sentences. But the real horror came not just from the murders, but from what came after. From her death row cell, Aileen spoke like a woman unraveling, then tightening again into something even more dangerous. "I killed those men," she wrote, "robbed them as cold as ice, and I'd do it again." There was no apology, no tears, just pure, seething hatred for the world that in her mind had always wanted her dead anyway. And maybe she wasn't wrong. She was poked, prodded, studied, and filmed. Her life became the content for documentaries, courtroom dramas, and eventually an Oscar-winning film, Monster, with Charlize Theron morphing into her mirror image. But the real Aileen? She unraveled slowly. In her final years, she ranted about being poisoned by guards, tormented by noise, raped in her dreams, and crushed by invisible forces. She accused prison staff of trying to drive her insane and said the world was conspiring to twist her into the monster they needed her to be. Still, she wanted to die. She pushed to end all appeals. When psychiatrists ruled her sane, it wasn't a victory. It was a death certificate with ink still wet. On October 9, 2002, Aileen Wuornos rejected her last meal and settled for a plain cup of coffee. As the poison coursed through her veins, her last words were as surreal as her life. "Yes, I would just like to say I'm sailing with the Rock, and I'll be back, like Independence Day with Jesus. June 6th, like the movie. Big mothership and all. I'll be back. I'll be back." And just like that, the woman who called herself a victim and made 7 men victims was gone. Dorothea Nancy Waddingham. Dorothea. Nancy Waddingham was born on the 21st of June, 1899, and by the 1930s, she was running a private nursing home in Nottingham, England. Though not a registered nurse, her work was approved by Mrs. Blagg, the honorary secretary of the County Nursing Association, who trusted Waddingham enough to arrange for 2 vulnerable patients to be placed under her care: 88-year-old Mrs. Louisa Bagley and her daughter Ada Bagley, who was afflicted with multiple sclerosis, then known as creeping paralysis. Earlier in February 1935, another patient, Mrs. Kemp, had died under Waddingham's watch. The treatment involved large doses of morphine, and notably, a quantity of the drug remained on the premises even after Kemp's death. Ada Bagley had a will that left her 1,600 pounds estate in trust for her mother, with the remainder to be divided between 2 cousins, Lawrence Bagley and Fred Gilbert, upon Louisa's death. Ada had been told she would likely die before her mother. But in May 1935, Ada destroyed that will and drew up a new one, this time leaving everything to Dorothea Waddingham and Ronald Sullivan as recompense for the care provided. That same month, Louisa Bagley died. Ada survived through spring and summer. On September 10, 1935, a family friend, Alice Briggs, visited her and spent the afternoon in good spirits. Briggs planned to have Ada over for tea in a few days. But the very next day, Ronald Sullivan contacted H. Mansfield, saying Ada was in a coma. Mansfield found her dead upon arrival. He wasn't suspicious. Ada's death had been expected. Relying on information provided by Waddingham, he certified the cause of death as cardiovascular degeneration. Ada had requested cremation. Had that gone forward, Waddingham might have gotten away with murder. But for cremation, 2 doctors needed to sign the certificate after notifying next of kin. Ada's will requested that no relatives be contacted, and Waddingham falsely claimed there were none. But Cyril Banks, the medical officer for health and the man overseeing cremations, was already wary of Waddingham's so-called nursing home. He knew it lacked a state-registered nurse, as required. Alarmed by Ada's note authorizing cremation, he ordered a post-mortem. The exam found no signs of any natural cause of death, leading to further analysis by W. Taylor, senior assistant to the Nottingham analyst. Taylor discovered significant morphine levels, over 3 grains, in Ada's stomach, liver, kidneys, and heart. This prompted the Home Office to exhume Louisa Bagley. Under the supervision of Dr. Roach Lynch, her body too was found to contain lethal morphine levels. Both Dorothea Waddingham and Ronald Sullivan were arrested for murder. Her trial began on 4th February 1936, presided over by Justice Rayner Goddard. Waddingham was defended by Mr. Eales, while the prosecution was led by Norman Burkett, an uncommon role for him since he usually defended. The prosecution highlighted that Ada's last meal, pork, baked potatoes, kidney beans, and 2 portions of fruit pie, was rich and heavy for a woman in her condition. Waddingham admitted serving it. This was used to imply that she tried to mask the morphine's effect and that she had no real concern for Ada's well-being. Waddingham claimed that Dr. Mansfield had given her extra morphine tablets for Ada, but the doctor denied this. Ronald Sullivan was discharged due to lack of evidence, although it was he who wrote the note authorizing Ada's cremation. On 27 February, Waddingham was found guilty of murdering Louisa and Ada Baguley. The motive? To inherit their estate. Though the jury recommended mercy, citing that she was a mother of 5 children, including a 3-month-old baby she was still breastfeeding, the sentence stood. She was hanged on 16th of April, 1936 at Winson Green Prison by Thomas Pierrepoint, assisted by Albert Pierrepoint. She had confessed shortly before her execution. Outside the prison, 10,000 protesters led by abolitionist Violet von der Elst chanted, "Stop this mother murder." Ada Bagley's fiancé, devastated by her death, committed suicide shortly afterward. Christa Gale Pike. Christa Gale Pike was born on March 10, 1976 in Beckley, West Virginia, to Carissa Hansen and Emil Glenn Pike. Her parents had a volatile relationship, married for 2 years, divorced after Hansen's affair, and remarried for 2 more years after Hansen's suicide attempt. Both parents were severely negligent. One aunt recalled baby Christa crawling through piles of dog stool, while Hansen partied despite being told her toddler was having severe seizures. Pike's paternal grandmother, whom she later said was the only person who ever loved her, helped raise her. When her grandmother died in 1988, 11-year-old Christa attempted suicide, receiving little to no support afterward. Her teen years were marked by chaos. She endured and inflicted violence. One of her mother's boyfriends punched her in the face. Charges were filed and later settled. While living with her father's new family, she was accused of molesting a young half-sister and sent away. Pike also claimed to have been SA'd at multiple points, though friends and family doubted her, citing her as a pathological liar. In one story, after a man threatened to rape her mother, Christa and a friend beat him with a stick in a parking lot. Although bright in her early years, frequent school changes led to academic decline. In 10th grade, she spent a year in juvenile detention and became interested in the Job Corps, a federal program offering job training to disadvantaged youth. By late 1994, Pike was enrolled at the now-closed Job Corps Center in Knoxville, Tennessee, where she began dating Darrell Shipp, a year younger than her. The two shared a fascination with the occult and devil worship. Pike grew jealous of 19-year-old classmate Colleen Slemmer, believing she was trying to steal Shipp from her, a claim Slemmer's friends denied. Pike, Shipp, and friend Shadala Peterson, 18, plotted to lure Slemmer to an abandoned steam plant near the University of Tennessee campus under the pretense of making peace and sharing marijuana. On January 12, 1995, the group signed out of the dormitory and headed to the woods. Once there, Pike and Shipp attacked Slemmer, while Peterson acted as lookout. For 30 minutes, Slemmer was taunted, beaten, slashed, and had a pentagram carved into her chest. Pike then smashed Slemmer's skull with a piece of asphalt, killing her, and kept a piece of her skull as a trophy. Pike showed off the piece of skull to others at Job Corps. Within 36 hours, all 3 were arrested. The sign-out log showed Pike, Shipp, Peterson, and Slemmer left together, but only 3 returned. Police found the skull fragment in Pike's jacket pocket. She quickly confessed, saying they only meant to scare Slemmer and that things had gotten out of control. At trial, Pike was charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Her confession and physical evidence were central to the prosecution's case. On March 22, 1996, the jury found her guilty on both counts after only a few hours of deliberation. On March 30th, Pike was sentenced to death by electrocution for murder and 25 years in prison for conspiracy. At 20 years old, Krista Pike became the youngest woman sentenced to death in the U.S. during the post-Furman period. Ruth Ellis. Ruth Ellis wasn't born a killer. She was born Ruth Nielsen on October 9, 1926 in Wales, an ordinary girl who eventually became the last woman ever executed in the United Kingdom. By her teenage years, Ruth had stepped into the world of nightclubs and champagne, working as a hostess. It was a life of bright lights and dark corners, filled with admirers, sugar daddies, and relationships that never ended well. She had multiple pregnancies, 2 abortions, and a marriage that fell apart. In 1953, she was managing the Little Club in Knightsbridge when she met David Blakely, a racing driver who was handsome, rich, and already engaged. It was instant chemistry. Within weeks, Blakely moved into her flat, but the relationship was toxic from the start, violent, obsessive, and deeply unstable. Ruth became pregnant again, but when Blakely punched her in the stomach, she miscarried. Still, she couldn't let him go. She began seeing another man, Desmond Cusson, a former World War II bomber pilot turned accountant. Ruth moved into his apartment at Goodwood Court, but Blakely was still in the picture and things kept spiraling. On April 10, 1955, Easter Sunday, Ruth took a taxi to Hampstead, looking for Blakely. She stopped at a friend's flat, but as she arrived, she saw Blakely's car driving away. She paid the fare and walked to the Magdala, a nearby pub where she suspected he'd gone. At 9:30 p.m., Blakely stepped out of the pub with his friend, Clive Gunnell. He walked right past Ruth, standing outside a newsagent. As he searched for his car keys, Ruth pulled a loaded revolver from her handbag and fired. The first shot missed. Blakely ran around the car. The second shot hit him, dropping him to the pavement. Ruth chased him down, stood over him, and fired 3 more rounds, one so close it left powder burns on his back. Then she tried to fire a 6th bullet, but the gun jammed. When it finally went off, it struck the pavement and injured a bystander, Gladys Ewell, who later lost the use of her thumb. Ruth Ellis didn't run. In shock, she turned to Gunnell and calmly asked, "Will you call the police, Clive?" An off-duty officer nearby arrested her on the spot. Ruth said quietly, "I'm guilty. I'm a little confused." There was no doubt about what had happened. Blakely had died from multiple gunshot wounds to his liver, lung, intestines, and trachea. The murder weapon was taken into evidence. It still sits in the Metropolitan Police's Crime Museum. Ruth was calm at the station. She wasn't drunk, wasn't high. She didn't plead insanity. Multiple psychiatrists confirmed she was of sound mind. She was formally charged the next day and held in custody until trial. On June 20th, 1955, Ruth appeared in Court 1 at the Old Bailey, dressed in a sharp black suit and white silk blouse, her platinum blonde hair freshly bleached. Her lawyers begged her to tone down her appearance. She refused. The prosecution asked her one question. "When you fired the revolver at close range into the body of David Blakely, what did you intend to do?" Her reply was chillingly direct. "It's obvious. When I shot him, I intended to kill him." That was all the jury needed. They deliberated for just 20 minutes before finding her guilty of murder. The sentence was automatic: death by hanging. Despite public outcry and petitions for clemency, Ruth Ellis was hanged at Holloway Prison on the morning of July 13, 1955. She was only 28. She was the last woman ever executed in Britain. They murdered in cold blood, some out of jealousy, others for control, vengeance, or something far darker. Their names are etched in infamy, their victims buried in silence. The courtroom gave them death. But the truth? It's far messier. So now we ask you, when the vulnerable kill, is it pure evil, or a scream born from a lifetime of being unheard? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you've made it this far, be sure to check out this next video. I think you'll enjoy it. Thank you once again for watching.